For me. Ladies and gentlemen, Mickey Dolenz. Mickey Dolenz, welcome home. I don't know how else to put it. We love having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
How you been?
Tired already. I'm like, it's hard smiling.
I know
constantly.
the feeling.
My jaw hurts, you know.
First off, for me, and I hate to do this, but I feel I speak for everyone, our deepest condolences on losing Mike, on losing your bandmates. These people were icons to us, but they're your friends and they're your coworkers. And
yeah,
sympathy.
it's weird. I'm not sure I've still assimilated it all yet, you know.
Seeing you and Mike at that last concert was one of the most heartfelt, beautiful evenings I have ever had. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was a great show. Thank you.
I could feel it coming from you both as well. You know, with such shared history with any groups that we love. And you've been part of this, you know, for the here it is, 50th anniversary of the Fest. You've been part of this. And there's so many things, you know, the last time we did this and the million things I didn't get to. Ed Sullivan, Beatles, Ed Sullivan, 60 years ago. Were you watching? Were you there? Was it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, tell me what that experience was for you.
Oh, I remember it quite well, because it was Beatle Week or Beatle Month. I mean, it was huge on the West Coast, in Los Angeles, California. And, you know, everybody was talking about it. That night of the Ed Sullivan show, I was in my car with a bunch of my friends, and we were at a hamburger stand, not stand, you know, a
drive-through
hamburger place that still had car hops.
Right.
Going around and serving you the burger in the window and the tray.
Awesome.
What? Oh.
They're excited for the burger joint.
Oh, yeah. And American Graffiti kind of situation. And remember, I'm only 19 years old at that point. And a friend of mine had found a little portable television, black and white little portable TV, and he found it somewhere. And you plugged it into your cigarette lighter for the power, and you put up rabbit ears on the roof of your car and tuned it in, and we sat there and watched this incredible event in black and white, eating a burger, watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And years later, of course, I find out that there was another act on the show that night, a little kid named Davy Jones, who was doing a song from the musical he was in, Oliver. He was Artful Dodger on Broadway. And I don't remember him. I think we watched the Beatles and then, you know, I don't know, something else. But I remember it well. I remember the whole buzz going around town. It was huge. And what was so unique, as I think back, not only was the music incredible and a different take, a different feel, because we had rock and roll and we had big bands, big acts, the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and surfing music and other kind of stuff on the top 40 charts. But up comes this group that put a little bit of a twist on the beat, essentially. But also it was weird that, first of all, living on the West Coast, on Los Angeles in the early 60s, Europe and England were like another planet. You know, it was like, you know, once in a while you'd get something from another country. sukiyaki, or does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight?
Classics all, yes.
Rolf Harris,
Timey
Tommy
Kangaroo
Kangaroo down. But it was like from another planet, Europe and England. You still had to get an operator to make an international call, if I'm not mistaken. And all of a sudden, these four guys who weren't much older than we were in my generation, maybe 2 or 3 years older, but they were grown-ups. They were like mature. They were cool. They spoke funny. They had an attitude. They had swagger. We're still 19-year-old kids. We're teenagers. We're little kids in the valley, and where I grew up in Los Angeles. You stayed a little kid and a teenager until your 30s. But these kids were grown up. They weren't kids. They weren't kids. They were grown-ups. A lot of that, in retrospect, probably had something to do with the fact that they were living in post-war England, and you had to grow up really quick.
Yeah.
And you could, at 18 you were considered an adult. But they just had this attitude, and they smoked, and they were cool about it, and they also had this sense of humor encapsulated in that one line when John Lennon was asked, "How do you find America?" "Turn left to Greenland." Well, that just blew me away. It was like, whoa, ironic, sardonic, satirical humor. You just didn't hear that kind of stuff. That's the cultural part of the thing that they brought over.
I always thought, we're doing a live show tomorrow morning, and one of the things we're going to talk about is the press conference that happened here 60 years ago. And, Elvis, every press thing, "Well, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, no, I don't rightly know." Always be polite, always be nice. If they call you an idiot, say, "I'm sorry, they don't like me." And when you see the bedlam of what that is, what is it that excites them so? If we knew, we'd be managers. That they were here 5 minutes, and Mickey is a veteran of TV. Even though maybe the larger media hated it or they're going to ruin the childhood, they were funny and they gave great interviews. So every news person in every city goes, "You got to get those 4 kids. Get us some tape with the 4 kids because people like it." And I always thought the other genius thing that Brian Epstein did. Here it is, Ed Sullivan, 73 million people. They hit it hard. Next song, "Till There Was You." Do a Broadway song from the Music Man so that Mom, Dad, and Aunt Gertie can go, "Oh, that's nice. I like them." Genius. Yeah. Genius of what they did. Mickey, and we don't have a whole lot of time because we could spend the entire evening doing this, but this poor man has to rest as I do. But for all of the monkeys, and we did that, and hopefully we'll cover that tomorrow, because we're going to do part 2 tomorrow. From watching that, and George Thorogood did the live show with me in the fall, and he said, "I've never met Mr. Bruce Springsteen or Jackson Browne or any of the gods of music, but I know, like me, I know where they were on February 10th, 1964. They were in the music store in their town, trying to see how much money they could scrap together to buy whatever instrument you could find. And we all started a rock band on the next day." Suddenly he said, "I think there were 200 rock bands in America. I'll bet you by Wednesday you couldn't find a tambourine anywhere." Because that was it. You do that. Do the Monkees happen? Does that TV show happen if the Beatles aren't this gigantic thing that's like exploding across the country?
Well, who knows? It's kind of a moot point. I mean, we'll never know. The history of the Monkees and how that came on the air and what it was about, a lot of misunderstandings and inaccurate reporting about it because, of course, the media jumped on it as America's answer to the Beatles, and it wasn't at all. Remember, the Monkees was not a group. It was not a band. It was a TV show about a band, an imaginary band that really didn't exist except on television that first season until we rehearsed and went on the road, and that was Monkeys .210. You know, that was a different group. That was the group.
That is a band, right?
But the TV show, the four characters on the television show, and I think this is one of the reasons why it resonated, is that, as you say, not just the Beatles, though that was huge, but music was in the air. I was up for 3 other pilots that year, of music pilots. So
I never knew
music was in the air.
Everybody wanted to get a show on.
Yeah, but they weren't all rock and roll. One was folk group like Peter, Paul, and Mary that actually did go to pilot. It was called The Happeners. You can find that on the internet. I was up for that. I didn't get it, obviously. There was another one about a surfing band that people had been trying to pitch for a couple of years before the Beatles had arrived. So music and youth, and because the youth had, what do you call it, dollars. They had
they had disposable
income.
Right.
Yeah, they had money, and all of a sudden they're buying records, and people are saying, let's get something on TV that speaks to that. And so, of course, the Beatles launched it into another universe. But the Monkees was about trying to be the Beatles. That's what the show was about. These 4 guys that wanted to be the Beatles or a rock and roll band, and spoke to all those kids around the world who were in their garages and their basements. And it's interesting to note, very smart decision the producers made. We never made it on the television show, ever. On the television show, we were always struggling for the success, which is, I think, one of the things that made it so endearing. We never made it on the TV show. We lived in this beach house in Malibu, and we were trying to get a record deal, trying to get a gig, trying to get a manager, trying to do, working at it. And we never made it on the show, which does beg the question of how we could afford a Malibu beach house.
But let's not quibble over.
But we'll let that go. And but that's what the Monkees was about, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why it resonated so well.
It was a kind show. It wasn't sarcastic, and we were heading into that. And there's a sweetness to it, and because we root for you. We're rooting for the Monkees to succeed, even though there's a sort of cartoonish,
very good point,
villain thing. But
very good point. Another great decision the producers made, and how they instructed the writers. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't satirical, and it wasn't. It was not topical.
Right.
The comedy wasn't topical. There's great shows of the time, like Laugh-In, which was very topical. If you didn't watch the news that week, you wouldn't have known. Kind of like Saturday Night Live is now. You have to know what's going on in current affairs. None of that in the Monkees, not satirical, and we never beat up on each other.
Yes.
They actually, I remember when they were gearing us up for it, we would watch mainly Marx Brothers movies, and it was actually John Lennon that I think made that first comparison. He said the Monkees they're like the Marx Brothers. That was very accurate, much more like the Marx Brothers than the Beatles.
Right.
The comedy, the humor, everything. The Monkees was essentially a Marx Brothers half-hour musical on TV.
The other really smart decision is getting you guys these fantastic songs from Carole King, which not to embarrass you, but your Pleasant Valley Sunday is one of the most beautiful, honest renditions of a beautiful song.
Great song.
It just is.
Carole King and Jerry Goffin. You must
Yes.
not forget Jerry Goffin.
Right. And Boyce and Hart and Neil Diamond and these, Ron Delsner.
We were blessed. I mean,
Yeah.
it was, I was blessed to have these people writing for us,
And it seems like it's something, may he rest in peace. I had that conversation with Mike when he came up before he passed, how, as you said, Monkees 2.0, suddenly we want to write our own songs. We want to play. You've gotten an ability, you have it now. You've done it. And that was where some of the friction came in with the producers?
Well, yeah, especially from Mike. He'd been promised, as he said, the way he tells it, they said, he was a singer-songwriter. And they said, yeah, we're going to cast you and you'll write and sing and play and produce and do your own music. And that wasn't the case. The powers that be got a hold of it when it just took off. And he tells the story, and I do this in my show. I tell the story of him. He says, I went in, I had my guitar, early days. He said, and he played a song for him. And they said, oh, thank you, but no thank you. That's not a Monkee song. And he said, wait a minute, I am one of the Monkees. And they said, yeah, well, don't call us, we'll call you. And so Nez kind of went, and he gave the song to Linda Ronstadt. That was different drum, Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies, before she was Linda Ronstadt. Right. And so he was very frustrated. I, not so much. I'd been singing, I'd been in the studio, I played guitar. They cast me as the drummer, the typical television. And I was fine with it. I said, yeah, cool, where do I start?
Right.
And I started.
But again, as total pros, Mickey and Davy Jones were actors as kids, right? As you came from a show business world, so you had a better sense of that. I think of how studios and producers go. Things change.
I knew I was being cast into a television show to play the part of a wacky drummer, like I had been cast into Circus Boy to play the part of a little kid at the turn of the century that had a pet elephant. And when I got cast in the Circus Boy, they said, you're going to learn to ride an elephant. I said, cool, where do I start?
Right.
And I did learn. And in the Monkees, they said, you're going to be the drummer. And I said,
cool.
I play guitar. My audition piece was for the Monkees. You had to be able to play and sing to get into the auditions. It's like a musical, because I've done musicals now, and the auditions were very much like a musical theater audition. My audition piece was Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And, again, not that anyone in Hollywood or producer would ever mislead you in any way. But as Mickey knows, things change. But it worked. It just works so well. And here's the wildest part, and again, there's a part 2 tomorrow, how this TV fantasy life switches over into real life. They become a real band, and Mickey winds up in the Beatles story in London in the studio. Almost nobody makes that jump from Mickey, cast as the drummer, to being in the room and singing along with the Beatles.
Well, that's a whole, like you say, that's a whole other long story.
Yeah.
But the producers must have had in mind that we were going to eventually sing and play, because they would not have insisted that you had to be able to sing and play an instrument to get in the auditions, to get through the auditions. There was acting, there was improv, there was interviews, and you had to sing and play. And like I say, my audition piece was Johnny Be Good. But I was in cover bands at the time as a singer and playing my guitar in folk groups before that in the late 50s, early 60s. So the producers must have had that in mind. They wouldn't have bothered. They would have just cast actors and dubbed everything else. And
just mime it and just do this.
Everything else. So they had it in mind. And we started rehearsing immediately, right away. As soon as they bought the show, we started rehearsing. I played like crazy, took lessons. I practiced day in and day out. And Mike put it very well. He said, when we went on the road and performed live for the first time in front of thousands of just the four of us, and it was really just a three-piece group because Davey didn't really play a lot of instruments. He played tambourine and stuff. So it was like a power trio with Peter Tork on the keyboards and sometimes a bass thing on his foot, or bass, and Nez on the 12-string, me on the drums. And Nez said, that's when Pinocchio became a real little boy.
Nice.
I always thought that was a great line.
It's absolutely true. Just out of curiosity, does anybody know who the opening act was for Mr. Dolenz and the Monkees? Yes, sir? Who? Jimi Hendrix? I've never heard of him.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, the first opening act.
As I was talking with Carmine, Led Zeppelin opened for Iron Butterfly, opened for Vanilla Fudge here in New York. The Beatles opened for Helen Shapiro. They were the opening of 8 acts for the great Helen Shapiro. You start somewhere, and the stories, as I've always heard, is that you were embarrassed for the kids screaming for the Monkees, and he was cool about it. Is that how it went? Well,
it was more or less. I mean, he was not happy about it when he's going, Police, come in, we want Davy, we want Foxy Lady, Mickey, Monkeys. I mean, how embarrassing is that? He was a lovely man. He was very quiet, not at all like his persona.
Really?
On stage, very quiet, very laid back. Very cool. Mitch and Noel were the same, just all laid back and cool. And when I saw him in Monterey, and I was the one that recommended they be the opening act. This is before they were the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Really?
I mean,
you mentioned it, but you said you need these guys in Monterey.
What?
You're the one who recommended they play Monterey Pop.
No. I saw them at Monterey.
Oh, got it.
And I said, that's a great act. They're very theatrical. And the Monkees was a theatrical act. And I said, that'd be a great opening act for us. They're very theatrical. All the clothes and the beautiful psycho-jello stuff going on. It was wonderful. And so I guess their people liked it and our people liked it. And so they ended up opening for us. Yeah.
The flip side, you exposed his music to an entire generation, thousands of people.
I think Jimi Hendrix would have been just fine with or without the Monkees. But I'd like to think maybe it gave a little bit of a, something to help.
So, by the way, Mickey is on tour now, and thank you for keeping the flame alive and touring and playing every night. It's important, the Stones going out, Hackney Diamonds, Paul's going out. As I've said to all my friends, like, who's stopping? Nobody's stopping. You don't stop. If you can do it, as long as you enjoy it, as long as you do it well and you're proud of your performance, and there's thousands of people, you're going to raise a victory garden? Why the hell stop? Who's stopping?
Hey, a moving target's harder to hit.
Always, always. I'm dear friends with the guys in Blue Oyster Cult. We've been fast friends, and as Eric Bloom said, you schlepped from Boynton Beach, Florida to Jacksonville for a flight to Cleveland to a puddle jumper to Iowa. And him and Buck Dahmer were in a rental car trying to get to a venue. We're exhausted. And Buck turned to him and said, 25? He said, 25 what? He said, it turns out we're booked for the rest of this year through Europe. The manager wants to know if we want to go out in 25. If we're alive, if we're breathing. I said, of course you are. As long as you can do it, of course you are. Rock and roll isn't stopping. It didn't happen with any other generation of music. Everybody stops, not us. Who's stopping? I'm not stopping. Mickey isn't stopping. We're going and going until, we've enjoyed it. There's nothing else that gets you these applause. What did Keith Richards say? Why? He says, because no one applauds when you take the garbage out at home, baby. That's exactly right. So, Mickey, on your show, our mutual friend David Salazar told me you're doing Oh Darling and Good Morning in your set? Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. I was at I tell the story. You'll have to wait. You have to wait and come and see the set.
Okay.
and I'll tell the story.
Okay, so there's a little tease for you to be able to tell that. And again, we'll talk about more tomorrow. You meet the Beatles. Let's just touch on it. You told it before, and I just want this one little thing. When you show up at Abbey Road Studios and you are dressed in your Jimi Hendrix refinery
talk
and
about
splendor.
Embarrassing.
Please share.
Well, that's part of the story, but I'll give you a little
hint.
bit. I was invited to a session at Abbey Road Studios by Paul. He was the first Beatle I met. Had dinner at his house in Maida Vale with the sheepdog. And he invited me to a session the next day for a new album they were doing called Sergeant Something.
That's a bizarre name.
Bilko?
Yeah, Sergeant Bilko. That's a bizarre name for an album.
I didn't know at the time what it was. And I'm not sure they had a title yet. But, and I showed up, and I don't know, it was the middle of the day, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I was decked out to the nines. I mean, I was psycho jello, you know. I think I was expecting some Beatlemania fun fest freak out psycho jello party thing, you know. So, and the rest you'll have to hear when I do the show.
It didn't work out just that way. Ladies and gentlemen, Mickey Dolenz with us for the 50th anniversary of the fest. Thank you so much. Mickey Dolenz. Stick around, my dear friends. Black Rabbit are going to come up here and jam, and then our musicians forum at 6 o'clock. We usually do it Sundays, where all of us